Rajesh gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white in the dim light of the dashboard. He was a king in his own right, the king of the road. For 20 years, he had navigated the treacherous mountain passes and desolate highways of India. His trusted Tata truck was his chariot, its rumbling engine a familiar lullaby. He had seen it all: blinding storms, reckless drivers, and the occasional wild animals straying onto the asphalt. But nothing could have prepared him for the night he encountered the unknown on the eerie stretch known as NH44. Rajesh wasn't a fearful man. He prided himself on his courage and his ability to stay calm in a crisis. Yet, as he drove deeper into the night, a strange unease crept into his heart. The highway stretched before him, an unending ribbon of black ink against the starless sky. The air grew heavy, thick with an unnatural silence that seemed to press against his eardrums.
Rajesh, a seasoned truck driver, had always considered himself the king of the road. For 2 decades, he had braved the most treacherous routes, his Tata truck his only companion. He had faced storms, reckless drivers, and even wild animals, but nothing could have prepared him for what lay ahead on NH44. As he drove deeper into the night, an unsettling feeling began to grow, the silence around him becoming almost oppressive. It was the early 1990s, and the highways were far different then. Streetlights were a luxury, and even the moon seemed to hide its face on this particular stretch of NH44. The headlights of Rajesh's truck cut through the darkness, illuminating the dense forest that lined both sides of the road. The trees stood like gnarled sentinels, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The wind howled through them, creating a symphony of eerie sounds that sent shivers down Rajesh's spine.
He had been driving for hours, the monotony broken only by the occasional truck he passed. Each encounter was a small comfort, a reminder that he was not alone in this vast expanse of darkness. But as the night wore on, even the trucks became scarce, and Rajesh found himself truly alone with his unease. The silence was broken only by the hum of his engine and the rhythmic thud of the tires on the tarmac.
The first sign of trouble came as a gentle sputter from the engine. Rajesh frowned, his hand instinctively moving to stroke the dashboard as if comforting a living being. He had taken meticulous care of his truck, and it had never failed him. The sputtering grew worse, the engine coughing and wheezing like an old man gasping for breath. Rajesh's heart sank as the truck lurched violently, the headlights flickering erratically before dying completely, plunging him into absolute darkness.
Panic welled up inside him, threatening to consume him. He fumbled for his flashlight, the weak beam of light doing little to penetrate the oppressive darkness. He was stranded, miles from any town or village, on a highway known for its desolate beauty and its sinister tales. He tried the ignition again, but the engine only groaned in protest, the silence that followed deafening.
Just when the fear threatened to overwhelm him, he saw it. A faint glimmer in the distance, like a beacon in the darkness. Hope surged through him, chasing away some of the fear that had gripped his heart. He gathered his wits, grabbed his flashlight, and stepped out into the night. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and the musky scent of wild animals. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of his own breathing and the frantic thumping of his heart.
As he walked towards the light, his mind raced. Was it another truck driver who could help? A small village he had somehow missed? Every step he took fueled his hope, urging him forward. The glimmer grew brighter, and he could make out the distinct shape of a woman standing by the side of the road. Relief washed over him, momentarily erasing the fear that had clung to him.
In the pitch-black night, Rajesh's hope was rekindled by a distant light. He ventured out, driven by the possibility of finding help, the fear momentarily pushed aside by the promise of salvation. As he drew closer, he noticed the woman was dressed in a simple white sari, her long black hair cascading down her back. Her back was to him, and she seemed to be staring intently at something in the distance.
Hey you, are you okay?
He called out to her, his voice hoarse from fear and exhaustion, but she didn't turn. He called out again, louder this time, but the only response was the rustling of leaves in the wind.
Please, can you hear me?
He was close enough now to make out the intricate designs embroidered on her sari, the silver bangles that adorned her slender wrists. He cleared his throat to speak again, but before he could utter a word, she turned, and he found himself staring into a face that sent a chill down his spine. Her eyes were hollow, devoid of life, and her skin, though smooth, had an unnatural pallor. Her lips moved, but instead of words, he heard a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the very depths of the earth. Terror, unlike anything he had ever known, seized him. He stumbled backward, his foot catching on a tree root, sending him sprawling onto the hard ground. He scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding against his ribs, and ran towards his truck, the woman's chilling growl echoing in his ears. As he fumbled with his keys, his hand shaking uncontrollably, he heard a man's voice, calm and reassuring, cutting through the terror that threatened to engulf him.
Don't worry, son. She won't hurt you.
Rajesh looked up, his vision blurred with fear, and saw an old man standing beside him. He was dressed in a simple white dhoti and kurta, his face weathered and etched with wisdom.
This highway, it's haunted by the spirit of a young woman who died here many years ago. She waits for someone to fulfill a promise.
The old man's voice was barely a whisper, yet it carried the weight of countless stories and untold sorrows. Rajesh felt a strange sense of calm wash over him, despite the chilling encounter he had just experienced.
Rajesh stared at the old man, his mind reeling. He wanted to dismiss it all as a hallucination, a figment of his fear-stricken mind. But the old man's presence was too real, his gaze too intense to be anything but real. He wanted to ask questions, to demand explanations, but the words seemed to stick in his throat. All he could do was stare at the old man, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. The old man placed a reassuring hand on Rajesh's shoulder, his grip surprisingly strong. "She means no harm," he said, his voice a low rumble. "She only wants peace." He leaned closer, his eyes boring into Rajesh's. "Listen to her, son. Help her find peace, and she will ensure you never come to harm on this road again." And with that, the old man vanished, as suddenly and mysteriously as he had appeared. Rajesh was left standing alone, the chilling image of the woman and the old man's cryptic words seared into his mind. He couldn't explain what had happened, couldn't comprehend the nature of the encounter he had just experienced. But one thing was clear. He was trapped in a realm beyond his understanding, a realm where the lines between the real and the supernatural were blurred. He realized he had a choice: cling to his skepticism, to the rational world he knew, or accept the possibility of the unknown.
He took a deep breath, the night air suddenly feeling different, charged with an energy he couldn't quite place. He turned towards the spot where the woman stood, her form shimmering in the darkness. His heart pounded against his ribs, a mixture of fear and a strange sense of purpose coursing through his veins. He didn't understand it, but he knew he had to face her, had to hear what she had to say. As he slowly approached her, the fear that had threatened to cripple him morphed into something else. A strange sense of empathy, a feeling that this ethereal being before him was not something to be feared, but rather something to be understood. He stopped a few feet away from her, his breath catching in his throat as their eyes met. Her gaze, though still hollow, seemed to soften, a hint of desperation flickering within their depths.
A cold wind whipped around them, carrying with it the faint scent of jasmine and the sound of a woman's voice, soft and mournful. It wasn't a voice he heard with his ears, but rather a voice that seemed to whisper directly into his soul. She spoke of a promise broken, of a life cut short, and of a restless spirit unable to find peace. She pleaded for his help, her voice filled with a sorrow that transcended the veil between their worlds.
As the first rays of dawn painted the sky with hues of gold and orange, Rajesh found himself standing on the side of the highway, a small earthen lamp burning brightly beside him. He had spent the rest of the night listening to her story, his skepticism fading with each passing moment. He learned of her name, her village, and the tragic accident that had claimed her life. He learned of the promise she made to her loved ones, a promise left unfulfilled, binding her spirit to the earthly realm.
With the coming of dawn, he performed a simple prayer, a silent plea for her peace and release. As the last traces of darkness retreated, he felt a shift in the air, a sense of lightness replacing the oppressive heaviness that had shrouded the highway all night. The woman in white was gone, and with her, the chilling fear that had gripped him for so long.
Rajesh knew then that the unknown was not always something to be feared. Sometimes it was a realm of sorrow and longing, where even restless spirits sought solace and peace. And sometimes it was in the hearts of ordinary men like him, where compassion and understanding could bridge the gap between the living and the dead. He continued his journey, the memory of the haunting highway forever etched in his mind, a testament to the unseen forces that shape our world and the possibility of benevolence even in the shadows.